So today we're diving into a story about Valencia, one that's pretty far from the sunny plazas and orange trees most picture when they think about this city.
Yeah, it is. It's a side of Valencia that often gets overshadowed, shall we say.
Exactly. And, we always aim to bring those less told stories to light, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Our focus today is a neighborhood called Casitas Rosas, which literally translates to little pink houses. Sounds idyllic, right?
It does, yeah, very picturesque.
But the reality, sadly, is far from that postcard image.
Right, from the reports and articles we've gathered, it's clear that this neighborhood is grappling with some serious issues. Crime, neglect, a sense of hopelessness.
Yeah, and that contrast is what we're really interested in unpacking today.
Yeah, how did a neighborhood that was designed with such optimism end up like this? That's the question, isn't it?
It is, and to understand that, we need to go back to the beginning. Those Casitas Rosas, they were built with a purpose, weren't they?
They were, yeah, you got it. They were meant to be affordable homes for working families, a chance to own a piece of the city and build a better life.
A symbol of upward mobility, something like that?
Exactly. And the name itself, Casitas Rosas, it conjures up this image of cozy family homes, bathed in the warm Spanish sun.
Almost like a little slice of paradise.
Right. And for a while, it probably felt that way for the families who lived there.
Until it wasn't.
Exactly. And that's where the story takes a turn because fast forward to today, and those charming Casitas Rosas are now described as vacant, graffiti covered.
With debris-strewn streets. Yeah, the reports paint a very different picture.
It's a stark contrast, that's for
And
sure.
a heartbreaking one, frankly. To think about those families, maybe even descendants of the original ones who are now living amidst this decay.
It's a reminder that these urban issues, they're not just abstract concepts. They have a real human cost.
Absolutely. These are people's lives. We're talking about their homes, their community.
Exactly. And it raises so many questions about how a neighborhood can go from a symbol of hope to, well,
And that's exactly what we'll dig into as we go deeper into the Casitas Rosas.
looking forward to it.
Me too. It's really a shame to hear how this neighborhood has declined. I mean, it's one thing to read about vacant buildings, but you mentioned crime as well.
Yeah, the crime situation in the Casitas Rosas, it's a big part of the problem.
From the sounds of it, not just petty crime either.
Right, we're talking about some serious stuff.
Yeah.
Drug trafficking is a major issue according to these reports.
Wow, drug trafficking, that's heavy. And that's not something that just stays hidden. I imagine it impacts daily life for the residents.
Exactly. It spills out onto the streets, makes the whole area feel unsafe, creates that atmosphere of fear.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially for families with children.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine being a parent in that environment. You'd be constantly worried.
I can't even imagine. And that constant fear, it just feeds into the cycle of decline, doesn't it?
Right. It's like the more crime there is, the less safe people feel, and then the more the neighborhood deteriorates.
It's a vicious cycle. And do you know what makes it even worse? Those vacant buildings we talked
I
about.
was just thinking about those. What role do they play in all of this?
Well, they become like magnets for illegal activity. Drug deals, hideouts for stolen goods, who knows what else.
It's like that saying broken windows,
Right.
where one sign of neglect leads to more and more.
Exactly. It's the broken window effect, but on a massive scale.
And at that point, it's got to feel pretty overwhelming for the people who live there. Like, where do you even begin to address that?
That's a huge challenge for sure. And it's made even more complex by the authorities' involvement.
Because there is a police presence, right?
Yeah.
The reports mentioned regular raids in the Casitas Rosas.
Yeah, the police are definitely aware of what's going on and they're taking action, but it's complicated.
How so? I mean, on the surface, it sounds like they're trying to address the crime problem.
They are, but it's a double-edged sword. You see, on the one hand, residents want the crime to stop.
Of course.
But these constant police raids, they create this atmosphere of tension, like you're always being watched.
Oh, I see. Almost like living in a police state.
In a way, yeah. And it raises the question, are these raids actually addressing the root causes of the crime, or just creating more fear and resentment?
It makes you wonder if there's a better way, a more sustainable solution to breaking this cycle of decline.
Well, there are different schools of thought on this. Some people believe that drastic measures are needed,
Graphic like what?
like demolishing the buildings entirely.
Wow. Seriously. Just tearing it all down and starting over. That seems pretty extreme. I can see how tearing it all down might seem like the easiest solution, but it's definitely not that simple. And what happens to the people who still live there?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? And to be honest, the reports are a bit vague on the
But we
specifics.
don't really know what the Ayuntamiento's plan is for relocating residents,
It doesn't seem like there's a concrete plan in place, at least not one that's been made public.
which makes sense, I guess, because you can imagine that's a whole other can of worms.
Oh, absolutely. There are so many factors to consider. Where would these families go? Would they be compensated for their homes?
Right, and how do you even begin to put a price on the disruption to their lives, their community?
Exactly. It's a incredibly complex situation, and to be fair to the Ayuntamiento demolition isn't the only thing on the table.
Well, really, they've got other ideas too.
They do. The plan also mentions creating community spaces in those areas where they tear down buildings.
Okay, so think like parks, community centers, that sort of thing.
Exactly. Places where people can come together, rebuild that sense of community that's been lost.
And I'm assuming those spaces would be designed with safety in mind,
Hmm.
like good lighting, maybe security cameras, things like that.
Right. The idea is to create a space that feels welcoming but also secure.
Because if you're trying to revitalize a neighborhood, safety is obviously key.
It's essential. You need people to feel comfortable being out and about interacting with their neighbors.
Otherwise, what's the point? But let's be real for a second. Have we not heard this all before?
What do you mean?
Well, promises of urban renewal, shiny new buildings, community spaces.
Mm.
But then what happens?
I see where you're going with this. Yeah, the track record for these kinds of projects isn't exactly stellar.
Exactly. And I can't help but think about the residents of Casitas Rosas. They've seen firsthand how these things can go.
And they've probably heard a lot of empty promises over the years.
So it's no wonder they might be a bit skeptical about this new plan.
Oh, I'm sure there's a healthy dose of skepticism going around. And rightfully so. I mean, they've been let down before.
It makes you think about those other cities we mentioned earlier, the ones facing similar challenges.
La Mina and Pignatelli, you mean?
Exactly. They also went through these massive revitalization efforts. Did it work? Did those neighborhoods actually improve?
It's tough to say for sure. I mean, every situation is unique.
Sure.
But it seems like the jury's still out on whether those projects were truly successful.
So where does that leave us with Casitas Rosas?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's clear that there are no easy answers here.
Nope, definitely not. This deep dive has really highlighted the complexities of urban decay and the challenges of revitalization.
And I think it goes beyond just Casitas Rosas. This is something that cities all over the world are grappling with.
100%.
Yeah.
And while we may not have all the answers today, one thing's for sure, these issues deserve our attention.
Absolutely. We need to be having these conversations, shedding light on these forgotten corners of our cities.
Because at the end of the day, it's about people's lives, their homes, their communities, and that's something we should all care about.
Couldn't agree more.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've done a pretty good job of unpacking this complex issue.
Yeah, I think so too. Hopefully our listeners have a better understanding of the challenges facing Casitas Rosas.
And maybe even feel inspired to learn more about similar situations in their own communities.
Exactly. Because these aren't just isolated incidents, they're part of a larger conversation about urban planning, social justice, and the future of our cities.
Well put. And with that, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the Casitas Rosas. As always, thanks for joining us, and keep those critical thinking caps on.